Hi and welcome to this 4-minute mull, which I'm squeezing in on the weekend because I wanted to share with you very briefly a few thoughts around this letter that had been sent from UK anti-doping to British cycling in the aftermath of the now infamous Jiffy Bag scandal, the mysterious package that was sent to Bradley Wiggins just before he won his Tour de France. If you haven't seen that letter, I will post a link to it beneath this video on my website, along with 1 or 2 news articles that I think you might be interested in reading. But basically what the letter does is it outlines step by step all the various failings, procedural, medical and governance, that ultimately hindered the investigation by UK anti-doping into that case. If you want a summary of what's in the letter, basically you could do a lot worse than writing down a list of 7 or 8 things that you think are essential for a medical doctor and a high-performance manager to do in a high-performance sports environment, and then just imagine exactly the opposite, because that's what Sky did. And so ranging from disorganized and chaotic medical facility, complete lack of process and procedure to document and track how pharmaceutical products were used and disposed of, no record keeping or backups, the complete absence of control or governance of those doctors, conflation of roles between British Cycling and Sky. It's just from start to finish, point 1 all the way down to point whatever it is, 12. It's just step by step exposing Sky's lack of professionalism in this regard. And the reason I think that's important is because a big part of the mythology of Team Sky was built in part thanks to collaboration with certain compliant media on this whole issue around Sky being attention to detail, no stone unturned, the most professional, certainly cycling, if not sports team ever formulated. And when you in fact listen to someone like Dave Brailsford talking, he says the words. You ask Brailsford, how is it that Sky are dominant in cycling? And he'll give you an answer like, well, we leave absolutely no stone unturned. We pay attention to detail. We invest a huge amount of time and resources into understanding every single thing that makes a performance difference. And then we employ the very best people in the very best high-performance environment to create the most professional sports team in history. That's the kind of thing that we've been fed over the last 4 or 5 years. In reality, what the letter exposes is that when Sky are now asked, can you explain the contents of a Jiffy Bag, the answer is, well, I'm afraid we can't do that because we don't have the records, we don't have the details, we don't have the people who can answer those questions for you, or they're not available to speak to you. And ultimately what it boils down to is we simply aren't professional enough in that area to give you the answers that you need. Now, please leave us alone. We've got cycling races to win. And I hope you can appreciate that those two things are incompatible. Sky want people to believe that the reason they are so successful is the very thing that UK anti-doping's letter takes away from them. And hopefully that's what comes out of this, is that this marginal gains thing, which many people made a lot of money off, is ultimately a marketing campaign and not reality. Someone raised this question: is it not true that if Sky were cheating deliberately, they would have kept records and been very detailed? Well, no, because number 1, cheating is not synonymous with being meticulous, and number 2 is precisely the opposite. If you were going about a doping program, having learned some lessons from the past, the fundamental thing that you would do is to make sure that it's off the books. You might keep some records of who's using what, but what you would do is you'd have a very small group that's got ultimate deniability because there are no records and no record keeping. So I don't agree with that. I think that what this does is it doesn't necessarily prove that Sky are doping, but it takes away a big part of their explanation for their success as being this ultra-professional team, because ultra-professional teams do not get sent letters with all these items in them. And then a final point on a sort of more broad, bigger picture note is that what the letter does, what struck me when I read it, is just how absolutely ineffective and impotent anti-doping is. In this case, it's UK anti-doping, but in the past, it's been US anti-doping. Remember when USADA was trying to investigate Alberto Salazar and his use of a medical doctor to give dodgy TUEs and prescriptions? US anti-doping eventually ran into a wall because they simply lack the investigative powers and authority to probe and to subpoena and to compel people to talk to them. And that's what happened here. So what you get is UK anti-doping doing an investigation and basically being fobbed off, being blocked in every direction that they approach from. We don't know the answer. We can't give that to you. No records, nothing to see here. But they've got no recourse. They can't act on it. And so you get this letter that lists all the failings, but the introduction to the letter says, thanks very much for your cooperation. And no action is taken, with the exception of referring one doctor, Richard Freeman, to the General Medical Council. That's all they could do. Now, and I know that there's some issues with UK anti-doping, but that's not their fault alone. That's an anti-doping problem because the system has been set up to be so reliant on a positive test. The only time anti-doping agencies or authorities have got real power is when they've got a blood or urine sample that they can bring to a case and try and nail you with that. And until that changes, this kind of thing will keep happening. This is basically the equivalent of saying, you've done all these different things wrong. You're completely untrustworthy. You cannot be believed, but we're going to close the investigation and hope that you make some changes. Not good enough in my opinion. Join me next time for another 4-Minute Mull.